So, Mike, here we are. What are your thoughts? This is Mark 8:31 to the end, I think, isn't it? So what are your thoughts?
So the bit in here that kind of stands out immediately to me is Jesus saying, whoever would be my follower must deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. And it always occurs to me to say that Jesus is not being nasty to us here. And it's not that kind of glib sort of no pain, no gain approach that he's taking. But what Jesus is really saying is something that we know is true in life, that if you want to learn to swim, you're going to have to get in the water, and getting into the water's cold. So, you're just going to have to overcome that. And if you really want to do maths, then you're going to have to learn how to add and subtract and multiply and divide. And that means times tables, which are not necessarily what you want to do. But if you want to get there, this is what you have to do. And so it's really important that we don't think that somehow God is standing there with folded arms saying, impress me, or being mean towards us. God in Jesus is saying here, if you want to follow me, then this is how it is. This is what it's going to look like. And it's quite difficult for us in the present age, because I think I want to and it pleases me are widely regarded as overriding reasons for doing an awful lot of things today. But we know from our experience as parents, or experience just as growing up, that what we create, if all we ever do is indulge in what I want or what pleases me, we get monsters. And we need to grow in ways that are not driven by our immediate desires or wants. Otherwise, we'll never sustain a relationship. We'll never develop educationally, musically, athletically, and a whole series of ways. And what's worse, we'll be enslaved by the crushing weight of having to get what we want all the time. So, I think what Jesus is saying here is something that I think we, at one level, we know is true of life in terms of our development and our maturing. So take up your cross, he says, and in this way we can begin to be freed from our kind of self-contradictory and surface desires and wants. But it does mean we're being challenged to want what at the moment we don't want, and not want what we do want. That we're being challenged actually to think what we don't think, and not to think what we do think, if you see what I mean. And that's all, it seems to me, part of our discipleship and part of taking up our cross. The other thing that I sometimes do with this passage is I look at it through the lens of some other teachings of Jesus, such as, for instance, the pearl of great price, or the treasure hidden in the field. That actually the guy who actually gives away all he has in order to obtain the precious pearl or the treasure in the field is not worried about all the sacrifice that he makes to obtain that pearl or obtain that treasure. All he's thinking about is, I am delighted to be getting that pearl or that treasure. And there's something about what motivates us to take up our cross that is found in those passages, that actually we are, if you like, ravished by the kingdom, compelled by the Spirit, and so attracted by the way of Jesus and the person of Jesus and the promise of fulfillment that we find in Jesus, that what looks from the outside in the world like terrible sacrifice and giving up is actually simply the means to a life the other side of that taking up the cross, which is beautiful, glorious, and wonderful in and with our Lord. So what can look rather austere and bleak and about no pain, no gain, understood through the lens of actually how we see Jesus and his promise, is utterly transformed. So
yeah, I suppose I'm feeling a bit uneasy about this is like learning maths.
Yeah.
Because I don't remember a great deal of pain about learning maths.
I'm speaking to other people than you, probably.
But I guess I'm struck by Peter in this story, because we've just had, before the passage, Peter declares to Jesus, "You are the Messiah," and so you've got this great declaration of Peter, and then Jesus foretells the passion, and what's interesting is that Jesus says that he will suffer, die, and arise again. But Peter doesn't hear "rise again." Peter, presumably because he's got this very clear understanding, or some understanding from his own Jewish culture of what Messiah will be like. Suffering and death are not part of the equation. And so he immediately responds to that. And of course, in the end, for Peter, that is what he suffers, because he himself is crucified. So I guess I'm thinking in my it's partly sort of Bonhoeffer's cost of discipleship as well. I mean, in my experience, that kind of suffering and endurance and the giving up, the whole, what you lose in this process is actually quite painful, and it's a lifelong process. You don't sort of suddenly come out the other side and everything's fine. So I'm just, I guess I'm just sort of slightly nuancing what you're saying there, and recognizing that the journey, the journey of following Christ is one that does require us to give up things that we hold quite tightly to, often to do not with possessions, but to do with our own identity, our own sense of how things are, how the world should be, and also about our own security. Because one of the things about carrying your cross is that people will mock you and deride you, because you are, look at that, look at him, he's having to carry his cross. So it's not, oh, isn't this great, we're all carrying our cross. And I'm just slightly kind of
And I think
alternative to learning a musical instrument.
No, it is a very domestic analogy, and there is something also, I think, here about there is a cost whatever happens. There is a cost to discipleship, a cost in terms of taking up your cross, in terms of suffering and potentially death. But what we often don't talk about is the cost of non-discipleship, that there's really a big cost to non-discipleship. Now, sometimes that cost is immediately borne by others, as Jesus scrambles out of Jerusalem and leaves them all to it. But actually, there is a cost to us if we don't take up our cross, in terms of where we end up. In the same way as with Jesus' teaching, there's a cost to loving our enemies, but there's a real cost to hating our enemies, in terms of, how we are as people. There's a cost to not getting angry, as he says in the Sermon on the Mount, but there's equally well a real cost to being angry people all the time. There's a cost to being the first to say sorry, but there's also a real cost to spending whole days in strops and sulks and the such like. So in some ways, the other thing I suppose I'd want to say about this is it's not as if there's only a cost to discipleship, but that actually there's a cost all round. And what kind of cost are we willing to pay? And also, I suppose the other question is, and who bears the cost primarily? Because one of the significant things about Jesus here and his followers is we are willing to bear the cost ourselves rather than somebody else to bear it.
And of course, the real cost of not taking up your cross is that you will never experience the joy of the resurrection.
Yeah.